Hello, I'm Maria Hall Brown, and this is LA Currents. Well, of the 278 species represented at the LA Zoo, 58 of them are endangered. But the zoo cares about animals all around the world. As a matter of fact, they have a new director of conservation. Well, it's been a couple years now, and I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Jake Owens, Director of Conservation. You're the first.
Yeah, it's my honor. It's really it's a tremendous pleasure to be here in this position and to really help drive forward Los Angeles's initiatives in conservation globally and here in Griffith Park and Los Angeles.
You know, I'm going to jump to something that I was going to ask a little bit later, but I think that this is really applicable. The practical definition of a zoo, if you look it up in the dictionary, says a facility in which animals are confined within enclosures, displayed to the public, and which they may also be bred. I think things are changing, are they not? Or am I mistaken that zoos seem to be moving away from just that one mission and expanding a mission to be far more supportive to animals around the world?
Yeah, I think it's really a lot of perception. So one thing, I'm a field biologist. I've worked in the field all over the world, and in nearly every project, maybe every project I've ever worked on, whether that's turtles in New Jersey or primate conservation in West Africa or pandas in China, every single project that I worked really closely with zoos, because zoos have this tremendous expertise in a variety of things, and obviously animal care and animal health, but also how to make connections with people and nature and support conservation that way. And then even as almost simple but really crucially important construction. How do you construct facilities where animals and humans can work and live together safely? That's really important for conservation, for a variety of types of programs like reintroductions. And you don't think of that as conservation. Construction, no, that's not conservation. But realistically, anything that has an application that helps further biodiversity conservation is conservation. And so I kept on from the outside, from the field, kept on working with zoos and getting this tremendous support from zoos, whether it's expertise or funding or whatever. And I thought, well, why don't I try to get on the other side and help a zoo, especially a zoo in such an immense city like Los Angeles, really grow their conservation and their impact on the world.
Okay, so you've been in the position a couple years,
Yep.
but you guys have just recently launched an initiative, which is a very, very bold conservation initiative. What are some of the points in that project, and what spurred that on? Or was it just you saying, come on, we have to do this?
No, the zoo a few years ago had the forethought. They said, we need to do more. We need to focus our efforts with more strategic intentionality. Right, so right now the zoo does a lot of conservation work, and I think the zoo in Los Angeles should be proud of that. The California condor exists today because of the zoo and its partners. That's not a trivial thing. But to be really impactful, especially right now because there are so many threats, and the threats are growing both to humans and wildlife, the zoo said we need to do more, we need to do more better. And so they created this position, the Director of Conservation position. They found the funds to support it and support the whole program. And then I came in 2 years ago, initially just really to develop this conservation strategic plan, which took a ton of work because you're going back through historical records and finding out, okay, what have we done? Where are our strengths? What animals do we have? And therefore that helps to kind of guide what our focal efforts are. And so we took the time to develop this really strong plan, and we've got 6 key focal areas.
Okay.
So that's social and environmental justice, California conservation, human and wildlife coexistence, illegal wildlife trade, evidence-based conservation, and reintroduction or conservation translocations. So there's these 6 key focal areas that we have decided, based on a variety of reasons, that we need to really hone in on and focus on because of the strengths of the zoo, the strengths of the city, our location in California, Los Angeles, and a variety of other reasons. And the big focus for the last year globally has been the kind of social outcry about inequality, and that's actually really tied to conservation and conservation success. And a lot of conservation has realized this over the last decade or so. And so we're focusing on these key areas, but there's also this thread of remembering humans in conservation that kind of goes throughout.
I was going to say, most of what you just said, I can kind of visualize in context with, if not the zoo, animals in general, but social justice.
Yeah.
Okay. Pare that down beyond the headline
Yeah,
there.
sure. So basically all conservation issues have a human element to it. Okay, so one of the big focal areas, things that we've focused on for years is human and elephant conflicts. People don't realize that one of the biggest threats to Asian elephants are conflicts because there's not that much land left anymore, and elephants need land and they need food and resources, but there are people there who also need land and food and resources, especially in farming towns and things in Southeast Asia, where it's Borneo, Malaysia.
And elephants can be destructive.
Yeah, so elephants will come out of the forests because there's a really good food source right across the street. And then the farmers lose their crops. They've lost all their money to feed their family, give education, medicine for their family. And so it causes this conflict, retaliation. There's actually a lot of deaths, both humans and elephants, and it's a really bad, unfortunate situation. And so just protecting those elephants isn't going to stop the human loss of livelihoods and life. So unless we're focusing on both those issues at the same time, we're not going to have the best shot of countering the issues and the threats or solving the challenges. And so that's one example. But right here in Los Angeles, a really good example is providing opportunities, especially paid opportunities for people who have historically not been represented in conservation. So people who are representative of this community here, opportunities to get engaged in conservation, especially paid opportunities. So you're kind of reducing the barrier to say, like, you have to have the money to be able to do an internship for 3 months without any pay, just to get your foot in the door so that you can then pursue a career in conservation. If we really want conservation to work, we have to open those doors as wide as possible and create those opportunities. And so we have this new conservation internship program at the zoo. It's our first ever. It's a partnership with the LA College Promise Works program and the mayor's office. Wow. And so we had our first 2 interns, Ord Martinez and Rachel Ortega. They started and finished in the winter term, and it was fantastic. They were awesome, and it was a really good example of what we can do to increase accessibility and conservation and careers, and yeah, it was fantastic.
How are you partnering on an international scale? Who are you working with, and how does that work, given the fact that we're in LA and they might be in Africa?
Yeah, so a good way to think of it is, how can we bring the resources that we have here in LA to where it's needed in the field? And often the people who are in the field are the experts in whatever they're doing. Somebody who's working, say, in Baja on Peninsula pronghorn conservation. This is a program that the zoo's been engaged in for more than 20 years. We joined this partnership in 2000. And at this point, they're the world experts in breeding and releasing Peninsula pronghorn, this very endangered species. We actually have some representatives at the zoo, and
what are they?
So they're really cool, actually. So it looks like an antelope, and some people call them pronghorn antelope, but they're actually the only member of the superfamily of giraffes. So you've got giraffes, okapi, which are the weird kind of smaller giraffes with stripes like a zebra, and they live in forests, and then you have pronghorn, which are the fastest land mammal other than cheetahs, and really cool, very weird animal. And in Baja, there's a subspecies that there's fewer than 700 of them in the whole world. And but that number in the wild was about 15 in 2014. And so the conservation efforts of this local NGO and government, Mexican government, their work has helped to restore that population. And the LA Zoo and San Diego Zoo and a few other zoos were part of this consortium of zoos that helped support them. So at first it was, how do you care for fawns? You're breeding these pronghorn. How do you care for the fawns so that they grow up and they can breed themselves? And at this point, they don't need any help on that. They are the experts on that. But one of the things that they wanted to do was have this really vibrant visitor center for local tourism. So Guerrero Negro, which is the town that they're very close to, has a big whale watching tourism industry, and they want to try to get some of those people in for conservation education and to get donations, and also the local people who are the key stakeholders, these farming ejidos, farming collectives. They want to sell their local made products there to generate some income for themselves. So they've got this beautiful building with very little inside to entice tourism and to really generate the support that they need. And so, we were down there helping them develop this plan for conservation for pronghorn, and I just looked around and said, this is something that the zoo does every day. Developing these connections with nature, with people from the public to generate support and conservation. Sure. That's something the zoo is very, very good at. And so we worked with the Peninsular Pronghorn Recovery Program down in Mexico, and now we're developing together this really fantastic visitor center to entice tourism. And the long-term plan is, okay, let's create this space for local engagement, conservation, tourism, and all this different stuff. And then let's also provide some of the capacity building. So let's make sure that they have the skills to, when tourists come in, to guide them around, to teach them, the things that they want to teach these foreign and local tourists. And so that's a really great example of, the zoo has this fantastic expertise in engaging people with nature. Let's take that where it's needed elsewhere around the world. And so there's a lot of different programs that we've worked with for years, and so some of those will continue to expand, right? A great example of that is with, there's a program in Sri Lanka where they work on human-elephant conflict, and they get in front of about 20,000 school students in Sri Lanka every year to educate them and engage them with human-elephant conflict to try to reduce the conflict. But they don't have the background in social sciences to figure out, what's the impact of our campaigns. Like,
sure.
We get in front of these students, does that change their behaviors? Does that reduce the conflict? And so my hope with this plan is that we can identify a lot of programs like that where they have a really great network and they're already doing this fantastic work, and we can help kind of bring it to that next level through partnerships with...
A value add of some kind.
Exactly, and really figure out what's the impact of their work and improve that impact through collaborations with universities or other NGOs or whomever else.
How is that going to impact this region and what people benefit from here with the LA Zoo? How are all of these things going to come back, and what's happening specifically domestically?
This is the biggest surprise for me. I'm an international field biologist. I've worked in jungles and lived in jungles for months and months, and I'm most excited about our commitment to California conservation because there's so much to do and so many great partners to help bring together. And so the first key initiative on this is called, I'm calling it right now, the Griffith Park Conservation Consortium. So Griffith Park is this...
Say that 3 times really fast.
Griffith Park
See?
Yeah. So, so there are already a lot of great and expert groups working in Griffith Park on its conservation or engagement with local communities and nature. And what we want to do is help to bring that together into a single, really well-designed structure so that over time we can say, okay, who's doing what? What's the action steps that are going to get to their end goal? How are we measuring that? And that we all know what's going on, and it's very transparent and collaborative. And so if they need, this group is working on, say, raptor nest surveys, how can we help support that? We've got experts, birders and raptor people at the zoo. Can they help support that work? Or maybe it's connecting people with nature. That's something that Rec and Parks is really engaged in. How do we increase accessibility of Griffith Park to local communities? Again, that's something that we have expertise in. They also have expertise, so let's combine that together and figure out how to bolster it, and then be able to track that progress over time so that if anybody wants to know, okay, what's happened in the last 5 years in Griffith Park, we can say, here it is. You can see it on this sheet. I can tell you. And then bringing all that together and having really important and quantifiable steps.
I was going to say, this is a bold. I used the word bold in my introduction, but I mean this is very bold.
This is LA. I mean,
what we do.
I'm from the East Coast, and I lived in China for 5.5 years, and I would talk to people in China, and they would say, "Where are you from?" And I'd say, "New Jersey," and they say, "I don't know where that is." And I'd say, "Philadelphia," and they say, "I don't know where that is." And so I'd say 76ers or Iverson, and people, they like NBA, a lot in general. And so that was one way. The only 2 cities that I could say and people would know where they were and recognize the name were Los Angeles and New York. And so that kind of recognition is because of all this impact that the city has had globally, the impact on art and entertainment and sports and so many other things, academia, this is an academic hub. And so how can we tap into that and 10 years from now, people say the same exact thing about biodiversity conservation. That's what I want. That's my dream. And I think that by developing this plan, we can identify the targets and then get the people from the city who can really engage in this, whether that's someone in their own yard, engaging in conservation, or it's somebody from industry or technology, really help to identify those resources, bring it in to have a much stronger impact.
How long is this initiative scheduled for?
This is a 5-year plan, so 2021 to 2026, and that's the
Okay.
starting. And part of the plan is we've focused on California conservation, and especially Los Angeles, is to make people aware that this is something that we're doing, that we have the capacity to do it if they partner with us. And so 5 years from now, my hope is that if I go to a restaurant or a bar or something in somewhere in Los Angeles and I wear my zoo hat, people come up to me, and instead of saying, "Oh, you work at the zoo, I've never been there," they say, "Oh, you've got that great program on in Griffith Park. I helped on a restoration event that the zoo helped lead with Friends of Griffith Park or Recon Parks." I'm hoping that we can change the perception of the zoo, that people really understand the conservation value of the zoo, both to them and future generations and globally, so that the next 5-year period we can do even more ambitious things.
I think a lot of people do know about the California condor and the fact that it was, we're talking about conservation and a success story, that it was, very dangerous. They are the ugliest birds in the world. I'm sorry, should I say that out loud? They are a unique looking creature.
Yeah.
But people did know about the California condor, but I had no idea about some of the other things that you're mentioning right now. I would imagine as part of what you're trying to do is not just necessarily do it, offer it, and have people involved, but to let people know that it's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you look at our conservation strategic plan, which is available on our website, for each focal area, we give some background of our history of engagement in it. So we give a few stories of, okay, here's things that we're already engaged in at the zoo or around the world that fits within this category, both to give some example for people who don't really understand what conservation translocation means. That doesn't mean anything to most people, but also to show that we do have this history of strength in doing this work in these focal areas. And so I'd say that people might have an understanding of California condors and their recovery in some way, but they might not know this really integral role that the zoo has played in it. I mean, we every year we breed several individuals. It ranges maybe 5 to 10 individuals every year, and then release them out into the wild. And so you had 0 condors in the wild in the late 1980s, and now you've got over 300, which is, it's really remarkable. And the funny thing for me is that I'd speak to somebody at a conference in China or a conference in Southeast Asia or something, saying like, "Oh yes, I work at the LA Zoo," and they know the condor program. And I'll talk to people in Los Angeles, and they have no idea that the LA Zoo was even a part of that, which is pretty amazing to me. And for me, it's kind of sad, because like, this is part of your legacy too. You're, as an Angeleno, this is your legacy of the zoo, your zoo, saving a species from extinction, and it's not the only one.
I think about the fact that there are how many billions of people in the world, there are how many millions of people in Los Angeles, and you're talking about now there are hundreds of condors out there. Now there are hundreds of these odd-looking giraffe species that look like antelope.
Yeah.
And I mean, that balance is really untenable, I would think, in so many ways, especially for someone like you. That the quantification of this must be incredibly, at once, terrifying and motivating at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you think about, okay, Asian elephants, right? That's a good example for Los Angeles, and there are roughly 40,000, somewhere between 20,000 and 50,000 Asian elephants that exist in the wild in these 13 different range countries that they live in. And you think, oh, 40,000, that's a lot. But you're talking about one small neighborhood in Los Angeles of people. And for a species, 40,000, you get a disease. I mean, obviously we've got disease on our mind right now because of this pandemic. You get one disease that wipes through the Asian elephant population, you're going to lose all of them, in a very short period of time. And so then you look at condors with, fewer than 400 in the wild, the same exact thing. So yeah, it's really scary. I mean, it's really scary. And I think that part of the challenge is figuring out how to make people understand why that relates to them or why that's even important. Who cares if the condor goes extinct? I don't have any relationship with the condor. But there are real connections. You know, they play a really important role in our environment. And when you think about all these different species, all these different ecosystems that are suffering like this, you know, there's this theory of kind of collapse that everybody's worried about. Biologists are really worried about, you know, if we have all these different, say, bugs, nobody cares about bugs, right? And typically in your everyday life. But in a lot of areas, they're just collapsing, a lot of pesticide use and some other issues. So what happens if all the bugs disappear in an area because of this collapse? You get to a certain point where the ecosystem just can't work anymore.
All right, well, I am going to jump into actually, you said the word pandemic and everything, so I'm going to jump into what's happened in the zoo, because you started in June of 19, correct?
July of 19.
July of 19, sorry, I was off my mind. July of 19, and then, ta-da, March of 2020, nobody's going anywhere.
Yeah.
Plus the fact that animals can get COVID. So how did the animals at the zoo fare, and how are we looking on the other side of this, if we are on the other side of this, slightly walking on, and what can people experience now?
So fortunately, we have a really fantastic animal health and animal care team, really great management, and so as soon as this was, you know, the pandemic was coming up, obviously a lot of meetings with experts figuring out, okay, what do we have to do to keep our animals safe? What do we have to do to keep the humans safe, both the people who work there and the visitors? Obviously, we shut down for most of last year, and it was really interesting. Some of the animals, they really missed people. It's very interesting. There's one Andean condor called Lead Bottom, and every time that I'd walk past his enclosure, I'd say hi. He'd hop over into his mating display, and he doesn't do that now when people are back, and he doesn't do that. Didn't do that before. No, he's done it to a lot of people, and it was just, he was like, oh, sweet, a person. This is really great. Other animals didn't seem to care, that much. But so now that we've reopened, obviously the zoo is open for visitors, and they can come and enjoy everything the zoo has to offer. But we're still obviously very concerned about both the health of our animals and the health and well-being of the people who work there and visit there. So there are still, recommendations about social distancing now inside. Obviously, wearing masks is part of the rules of coming to the zoo, just to keep everybody safe. But also, it's a really particular situation because we have animals, and those animals can get COVID, and we don't know, how susceptible a lot of them are and how strong they'll be impacted by it. So really, it's just being as cautious as possible for everybody.
Are there animal vaccines yet?
There are some animal vaccines.
Are there really?
Yeah. Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Did we have babies during the pandemic?
Oh, we always have babies. Babies are always coming through, yeah. Actually, I saw a few months ago Garenuk, which is...
You were just naming all of these creatures.
Fake,
I need
right?
to get to the zoo and understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a gazelle that's very tall, has a really long neck, kind of looks like a giraffe in that way. They're about that tall. And I was walking past and the enclosure, and some visitors said, hey, do you work here? I said, yeah. And they said, I think that one's having a baby right now. And I looked over, and it was.
Oh,
and
for
yeah, and
heaven's
so
sake.
that baby is in the nursery now, and with its mom, and yeah. So we
Baby Garenuk.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very cool, very pretty animal.
All right. I have to ask you, unrelated to your current position, China pandas. I mean, that was a big thing. I was raised on the East Coast, and Washington D.C. had a couple of the pandas, and oh my gosh, that was constant front page news about those pandas. What's going on with pandas? What is it like to work with pandas? Are they as fabulous as we see them? And what was your experience there?
Yeah. So first off, they're bears. So they act like bears. They're just kind of slow. And black bears run like a dog. They can jump. Pandas can't jump. They can run, but mostly downhill. When they get steam, they'll kind of roll. But they're also very bitey and clawy, and so I've got lots of scars to show because of that. But
because they're hugging on you, or because
they're playing. Mostly cubs
okay.
will play, and when they play like you're a bear, and when they do that, it causes some injuries. But no, pandas are great. They're super smart. People don't think that, but they are really, really smart. And I was working on a reintroduction program, so helping Chinese researchers at the Chengdu Panda Base develop this program to get pandas that were born at the Panda Base, which is kind of like a big zoo for giant pandas, red pandas, and then bring them out into the wild. And so I was developing how do we do that? And the way that we're doing that was by hand raising them and bringing them out into the wild. And right now, pandas are doing better than they were before. Their population's actually increasing slowly. The Chinese government's done a great job of protecting a lot of different habitat. I think it's more than 4 million hectares, which is bigger than Belgium, the country, protected just for giant pandas. And so they're doing fairly well. They're on an increase, but there's still only about 2,000 in the wild, which is not a great number.
Okay, and you're on this particular initiative, the one that's coming out of the LA Zoo. Are there particular endangered species that you're focused on?
Yeah, yeah. So we have, as a zoo, one of the things that I try to impress upon people is that we have these animals here at the zoo so that people come in and they support the conservation work. So that's, from my perspective, a big point of those animals that are here at the zoo. And so Asian elephants, we have Asian elephants. They're very endangered, and so we have a long history of engagement in Asian elephant conservation.
Right.
But we need to do more. So we're working with a group called Suratu Atai in Borneo to help them reduce conflict through this really cool camera traps, so real-time camera traps. Takes a picture in the forest and sends it immediately to an AI that says, oh, there's an elephant and it's headed out, so that we can send rangers to, before they leave the forest, and avert the conflict that will happen on the other side of the road. The rangers can just honk the horn and make a lot of noise, and the elephants go back in. So being able to real-time give warning to those rangers would really help to reduce a lot of that conflict. So we're working with Suratu Atai on that, and a tech NGO called Wildlife Protection Solutions out of Colorado. So that's one example. Indian gharial. Gharial are these crocodilians, or longest crocodiles, so they get about 20 feet long. They get these really narrow snout for catching fish, but there are fewer than 700 of them left. They live in northern India. So we actually work with two groups there, Madras Crocodile Bank Trust and Wildlife Trust of India on their conservation, and so increasing that. But there are species, obviously, the need is really great, and so we really have to focus in on those 6 key focal areas and figure out, okay, where can we have the greatest impact based on our skills and expertise.
And I need to do more research on animals, because obviously I don't know a thing. This is the last, we just have not a lot left is what I'm trying to say. People interacting with animals in the wild. You're talking about bears, you're talking about even moving elephants, but we do have wild animals here in Los Angeles because of a number of reasons. They make it close to residential areas. If in fact you see an animal, what's the worst thing you can do?
The worst thing you can do is go to approach it. That's the worst thing you can do. Animals, for the most part, in a good setting, they have no interest in interacting with a human. It's often that there's some bad setting, whether that's they don't have the resources that they need, they can't find the food that they need because the habitat's not there. And so, for example, a big one that I talk with people a lot about is coyotes. You see coyotes all the time now in Los Angeles. I walk my dog. I've seen coyotes plenty of times, and I've never had a negative interaction with a coyote. There's almost no recorded attacks of coyotes on people. It's almost always dogs or something like that. So the best thing you can do is pick your dog up and leave. Make a lot of noise. There was a good example last year of a guy getting chased by a mountain lion, and it was a mountain lion that had cubs, and she was trying to scare him out, and he made a lot of noise and kept his eyes on her and moved away for a few miles, and eventually she left. So that's the best you can do. Leave them alone. Don't interact. Don't feed them. That's definitely a no-no. And be respectful and keep your distance.
All right. Well, people want to get more information about all of the things that you're doing at the zoo in this conservation initiative, which sounds very exciting in a number of ways. How can they find out? If
you go to lazoo.org or lazoo.org/save-wildlife, but you can also see at the top of the header. You can go there, see the plan, download it. You can see a video and a talk that I gave about the plan. And you can also sign up to give your email and name just in case you are interested in joining our initiative. So if we've got a cleanup event or a restoration event with partnership, you can actually join in on those.
Okay, and you need to write a book on your adventures.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
My pleasure.
And that's a wrap on this LA Currents.